Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at passage and remembrance in our continuing study of Joshua, or Joshua chapter 3 through 5. In chapter 1, we saw the charge to Joshua. That sort of serves as the preamble to the book. Then in chapter 2, we had the sending forth of the spies. They go in to spy at Jericho. They're preparing to go in, but at this point, Israel is still on the east side of the Jordan River. And now as we come to chapter 3, we're going to see the crossing of the Jordan. And this is going to be the themes of passage and remembrance. Remembrance we'll get to in chapter 4. Chapter 3, verse 1 then. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and he and all the sons of Israel set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed. So they're getting ready, they're getting closer, they go right up to the edge of the Jordan, and then they pause. They lodge there as they're getting ready to cross. Chapter 3, verse 2, at the end of 3 days. Again, there's that reference to 3 days. And we've noted, whenever you see 3 days, it's helpful maybe to look for a picture of Jesus. And they're going to cross over the Jordan. Crossing the Jordan, crossing through the sea, just like crossing through the Red Sea, that had been the place of death. It was death for the soldiers of Pharaoh. And yet the sea divided. It was divided by the wind, and Israel had crossed through that place of death and had safely crossed over. Here again, the waters in Jewish thinking, especially lots of waters, are dangerous. And this is going to be a place of death. And yet Israel is going to cross over. And it reminds us of Jesus, who crossed over, who died and was buried and was in the tomb for 3 days. But then he rose again, so that we can also cross over into new life. Well, at the end of 3 days, the officers went through the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. They're to look for the ark. They're going to be following the ark. And notice this takes place at the end of 3 days. Verse 4, however, there shall be between you and it a distance of about 2,000 cubits. Now, a cubit is about, it's the distance between your elbow and your finger, and depending on how big your arm is, it's around 18 inches or so. So we can translate this to about 3,000 feet, roughly. Between you and it a distance of about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you shall go. Now, the reason they're to have this distance between them and the ark isn't because it's holy, although it is, but it's so that everyone will be able to see. You see, if everyone's right up on the ark, then the people in the back, they're not going to be able to see the ark. Where are we going? They won't know. But the ark is going to go out ahead, and then they shall follow behind, but well behind, from a distance where they can see the ark in the distance. And then he explains, for you have not passed this way before. A lot of times the ark had taken them sort of retracing steps, but this time they're going into new territory. None of the people here, except for 2 spies, none of the people had gone into the promised land, but they're about to go now. So the reason why is that you may know the way. We have one, and think about this, we have one that has made the way for us, who has crossed over, who has died and rose from the dead. I've never done that. I don't know what it's like to die. But there is one who has, and I can follow him. And by following him, I will know the way. Well, chapter 3, verse 14. So when the people set out from their tents to cross the Jordan with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and when those who carried the Ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests carrying the Ark were dipped in the edge of the waters. Now think about this. That water normally isn't that deep, but it is at one time of the year. Notice the parentheses at the end of the passage there. For the Jordan overflows all its banks all the days of the harvest. Now, when I think of harvest, living in the United States, harvest usually in the United States is in the fall, but not in Israel. In Israel, the harvest is in the springtime, because that's the end of the rainy season. The rainy season begins around October, a little bit more in November, a little bit more in December, and the winter months are the rainy seasons, such as they are in Israel. And then in the springtime, that rain begins to peter out a little bit, so that by March and April, I'm seeing the very last of the rain. And that's the time that it was here. And as the rains disappear, it's going to be dry, and it's going to be dry the entire summer. It doesn't rain in Israel during the summertime, maybe a little bit on the coast, but that's it. And so this is the time of the springtime. And in the springtime, that's the one time of the year where the Jordan overflows its banks. Not so much anymore, because nowadays they have dams to process the water and take it other places for irrigation. But back then, they didn't have those sorts of things. And so now, back then, the Jordan would overflow all its banks all the days of the harvest. And so these priests carrying the ark, they're going to walk up and they're going to step into the Jordan, and they're going to step in the Jordan at a time when the Jordan is overflowing its banks, when there's lots more water than usual. And they're going to step down into that, and they're going to have some faith, because they're going to step in to this running, flooding water. And what happened? The waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap, a great distance away at Adam, the city which is beside Zarethan. And those which were flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the Salt Sea, were completely cut off, so the people crossed opposite the Jordan. Now notice what happened. The waters stopped way up north at a place called Adam. They're crossing near Jericho. But way upstream, the waters were somehow cut off. We're not told how God did this. You know, when we read about the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, we're told what means God used. We're told that God sent a strong wind, and the wind pushed the water back. Over here in Florida, we call that tidal surge, and we get those in a hurricane. But he had used the wind. Here we're not told what means God used. You know, big giant hand come down from heaven. Was there some other sort of natural means that he used? We don't know. We're not told. But we are told that the waters way upstream at Adam, they were stopped there. And of course, if you've got a stream, you stop the waters upstream, then the rest of it's going to flow downstream and flow, in this case, into the Dead Sea in the south. And there won't be any more water. And that's exactly what takes place. So they cross the Jordan. That's chapter 3. And then we get to chapter 4, and now we read, this is the remembrance part, we read about the establishment of memorial stones. So chapter 4, verse 1. Now when all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, here he says, verse 2, take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from each tribe. Sort of reminds me when the spies had first been sent out. There had been a representative from each tribe. Well, here, God says to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, one man from each tribe, and command them, saying, take up for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over with you. So each man is going to take one stone, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the lodging place where you will lodge tonight. They're to collect 12 stones from the riverbed where those that are carrying the ark are standing, and they're to bring them to the lodging place outside the water, outside the realm where the water is, and they're going to set them up as memorial stones. Verse 4, so Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, one man from each tribe, and Joshua said to them, cross again to the ark. They're going to go back. They've already crossed over. They're going to go back to the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. Verse 6, let this be a sign among you, so that when your children ask later, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall say to them, because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, so these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. We need memorials. Why do we need memorials? Because we forget. And so these stones are to be a reminder of God's faithfulness. And they will be set up on the west side of the river to be a permanent memorial of what God had done by stopping the waters and bringing the people across. Verse 8, thus the sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as the Lord spoke to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. And they carried them over with them to the lodging place and put them down there. And so they accomplished that. 12 stones. Where do I read about 12 stones elsewhere in the Scriptures? Well, already in the book of Exodus, we had read that there had been 12 stones on the, now these hadn't been big stones, but 12 small precious stones on the breastplate of the high priest. Both Exodus 28:21 and again in chapter 39, verse 14. The high priest had these memorial stones on his breastplate that he wore when he wore his complete high priestly garb. We read about it right here as they're crossing the Jordan. Also, when we get to 1 Kings chapter 18, and that's the story of Elijah, who builds an altar on Mount Carmel, and he uses 12 stones. Why? Because the Israelites had forgotten God, and this is to remind them, and to show them the power of God. And Elisha's going to pray, and the Lord would send fire from heaven to consume a sacrifice, to remind the Israelites how great God is, and that this is the God you should be worshiping, not some other pagan god. And the final place we read about 12 stones is in the book of Revelation, where 12 foundation stones with the names of the 12 apostles are seen in the New Jerusalem as a reminder of what God accomplished. There's a sense in which he's making us into his stones, into his reminders. And he gives us a reminder as well. He gives us the Lord's Supper as we eat and remember, as we remember the one who is our rock of salvation, as we remember the stone that the builders rejected, the one who's become the chief cornerstone, as we remember Jesus. Now, we get to verse 9, and we read that Joshua then set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the feet of the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. Now, when we read that in I'm reading New American Standard, when we consult other translations, the NIV has actually changed this. The New American Standard that we just read actually follows the Hebrew pretty much verbatim. It's a very exact, careful translation. The NIV looked at this in the Hebrew, and the translators thought, even though that's what it says, that's not what it really means. And so they retranslated it to say, this is the NIV, Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan, at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. So the NIV says, no, he's just clarifying and further explaining how they set up those 12 stones by the side of the river. However, the Hebrew doesn't say that, and neither do a number of the Hebrew commentaries, people that read Hebrew. They read it in the Hebrew, so it's to them very clear, and they say, no, this is actually a second set of 12, where that first set of 12 were removed from the river, and now they're told to bring and set up 12 other stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the priests who are holding the Ark of the Covenant, they're still standing there. And so this is the second group. And of course, the question is, why would you set up 12 other stones in the middle of the river? After all, once the waters are released, once the waters come back, these stones are going to be covered up and you're not going to see them. And the rabbis would talk about why that is. And some of them would say, well, it's because there are some, it sort of represents the people that didn't cross over. And they're sort of just left under the water. I don't think that's the case. I think instead there is a reason. And the reason is because, remember, this is a seasonal river, where in the springtime it overflows its banks. But there are other times, especially in the dry times, in the times of the summer where it doesn't rain, and people are waiting for the rains to come, and they have to trust in the Lord. And in those dry times, that river gets very, very, very low. So low that these 12 stones that are out in the middle of the river suddenly will begin to show. And as they show, it will be a reminder in the dry time that yes, God is still faithful. And the same God that they can remember all year round is the same God who put up this extra memorial to remind them in the dry time that he can be trusted. Do you have a memorial in your life that reminds you of the faithfulness of God, even in the dry time? I think we do. I think we do. And so these stones remind us that God is faithful even when it's dry. And Joshua says, at least in his day, as it's being written, they were there to this day. Well, we get to verse 14. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, so that they revered him just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. You see, Joshua's been the leader, but sometimes the leader is compared with a former leader, and there had been Moses, and he had led the people through the sea, and he had led them through the wilderness, and then there's Joshua. How do you follow after Moses? But now that the people get to see this sight, that the hand of blessing is upon Joshua, now they say, oh, God is with him too, just as he was with Moses. Verse 18, it came about when the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up to the dry ground, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place, and went over all its banks as before. It was still in flood stage, and now the waters come back, and now they've crossed over. Now, we come to the next section. Notice the outline. I'm changing the outline a little bit. The same ideas, but I'm changing the shape of it. In chapter 1, we had the commission to Joshua, where Joshua was told to be strong and courageous. In chapter 2, we had the two spies going to Jericho and the sign of the scarlet cord, and we described that in terms of a covenant, where the scarlet cord was a covenant sign. Now in chapter 3, we've just seen the crossing of the Jordan, and then the 12 stones in chapter 4 as a sign of God's faithfulness to be remembered. But now we're going to read of other covenant signs, circumcision and the Passover. Because circumcision had not been ongoing while they were in the wilderness. And so now they're going to bring back and again observe this sign of circumcision. And also they will partake of the Passover. And then finally, in the last couple of verses of chapter 5, we have another commission to Joshua. And this time the angel of the Lord shows up and begins to speak to Joshua. And actually his message takes us into chapter 6, but we'll be looking at that at a future time. So chapter 5, verse 2. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, make for yourselves flint knives, and circumcise again the sons of Israel the second time. It's not that they had they had been circumcised and they had to be circumcised again. It's that there was now again a time of circumcision, because they had, and it's going to be explained, because they had not circumcised the newborn children while they were in the wilderness. So verse 3, so Joshua made himself flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath ha-Araloth. That is the hill of the foreskin. This place gets its name because of what takes place there as they engage in circumcision. Verse 4, this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. And now he explains. All the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war, died in the wilderness along the way after they came out of Egypt. For all the people who came out were circumcised, everyone who come out of Egypt were, but all the people who were born in the wilderness along the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. And of course you ask, why not? And the rabbis actually would talk about this. Was it because of disobedience, or maybe it was because it was difficult while they were on the way, while they were in the wilderness. You never knew, are we going to stay here and be healed? And we're going to say a little bit of healing needs to take place, because this is a surgical operation. And when they were in the wilderness, you never knew, are they going to stay here today? Because sometimes when the cloud lifted up and moved, they were moving. They couldn't really plan from day to day. They were following the Lord. But now they've come into the land, and now they're going to be circumcised. And then they will be able to rest and recover before they move on. So verse 8, when they had finished circumcising all the nation, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. Now they can stay in place. They're not moving. until the healing takes place, probably several days. Verse 9, then the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away, and there's a play on words here, because the word rolled, Gilgal, I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the name of that place is called Gilgal, the place of rolling, or the wheel, to this day. And the place gets the name for what takes place, because their reproach has been rolled away. You know, our reproach has been rolled away, not by a surgical cutting, but by one who died in our place, and then who does an operation not on our bodies but upon our hearts, who circumcises our heart as he brings us to faith in himself. So here we are. We're at Gilgal. We've crossed over the Jordan. We're ready to go to Jericho. But first, verse 10, while the sons of Israel camped at Gilgal, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month on the desert plains of Jericho. They're going to remember what God had done 40 years earlier as he brought them out of Egypt. They're going to remember the Passover. Verse 11, on the day after the Passover, on that very day they ate some of the produce of the land. Now it's unleavened because it's the week of unleavened bread. Unleavened cakes and parched grain. The manna ceased on the day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. And so finally they're able to eat produce from the land, and now the manna is taken away because the manna was only temporary. And that's significant because we have a better manna. We have a better bread. We have the bread of life that when one eats, it lasts forever. Jesus is our better bread. In fact, he was born in a place that means house of bread. Bethlehem means house of bread. And so he provides for us lasting sustenance from which we believe and which lasts forever.